Joining me now from central London is Lord Patten, the former governor of Hong Kong, who oversaw the colony being handed back by Britain to China 22 years ago. Lord Patten, thanks very much indeed for your time this afternoon. First of all, what's your reaction to those scenes that we saw in Hong Kong last night?
I'm extremely sad about them because, of course, they're not at all like the earlier demonstrations by students, which were peaceful on the whole. I think it's extremely regrettable that there was violence yesterday. I don't think that's acceptable. And I think it actually takes away from the really important part of what's been happening, which you referred to earlier in the report, that hundreds of thousands of people, up to 2 million people, have been demonstrating peacefully and lawfully about their rights as citizens, which they're anxious to retain. I think the problem when violence creeps in, as it plainly has for whatever reason, is that it takes away from the credibility of that campaign by hundreds of thousands of people. I very much hope the government will, among other things, have a public inquiry into the demonstrations that have taken place over recent weeks and to the way they've been policed, and include in that what happened yesterday, because everybody should be keen to know what exactly happened, why the police behaved as they did, above all, who was actually responsible for the violence.
What do you think their next step could be?
Well, I think it's very odd to hear Chinese officials talking about trampling on the rule of law when they've incarcerated about 1 million people in Xinjiang. I hope that the Chinese authorities, the Hong Kong Macau Affairs Office, which looks after Hong Kong at a distance, the Foreign Ministry, will be rather careful about what they say. And I hope that they will stop suggesting that the Joint Declaration doesn't have any relevance after 1997. The Joint Declaration was a treaty signed by Britain and signed by China in good faith, and it goes on until 2047. It gives us every right to talk about what's happening in Hong Kong, to discuss it with China, to discuss it with the Hong Kong authorities. That is our right under international law. And if China says forget about it, what they're actually saying is you can't trust us to keep our word. Well, not only should Britain intervene, should have the right, but it does have the right. And I'm pleased that Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary, said what he did say. This is an international treaty. China is obliged to it. Until 1997, we were obliged to honour our commitments to the people of Hong Kong and explain what we were doing to China. After 1997, until 2047, China is obliged to explain to the people of Hong Kong and to us how it's keeping its commitments to the citizens of Hong Kong. And it can't simply walk away from that unless it wants the rest of the world to believe that it can't be trusted to keep its word. Well, the Chinese keep on telling us that the China dream is something that everybody can share, but they seem jolly unsettled when anybody else has views of their own or wants to have free speech or wants to look up things on the internet. They're very concerned that people shouldn't know what happened in Tiananmen Square in 1989. So they have to get their story right. The truth of the matter is that China is an old-fashioned Leninist autocracy. China has done extremely well economically over the last 30 or 40 years. That doesn't mean that its system of government is one which is exportable, and it certainly doesn't mean that it can trash the freedoms of Hong Kong. What is absolutely plain, I think, is first of all she's got to do is say, I'm not just suspending the bill, I'm not going to reintroduce it. The bill is dead. Secondly, I think she should, as I said earlier, she should have a public inquiry into the whole question of the policing of demonstrations, including what happened yesterday. I think that would, if it was transparent and open and conducted by a senior, independent, well-regarded local figure, I think that would help to remove some of the anxieties and concerns people have on both sides.
I think that the people of Hong Kong are perfectly within their rights to be very sceptical, very anxious about proposals for extradition to the mainland that could be politically motivated, that could be arbitrary and could infringe their human rights. And so, yes, I do support them, and I will happily speak up for them and back them every inch of the way. And I was stressed to our friends in Beijing that the one country, two systems approach has worked, is working, and should not be cast aside. Look, I think it's very important to recognise that there can be significant benefits to investment from overseas in this country, and Chinese companies are welcome as much as any other companies. But you would not expect the UK to do anything to compromise its vital national security infrastructure, and you would not expect me as Prime Minister to do anything to compromise the ability of our fantastic intelligence services to share information as they do, particularly with our Five Eyes partners. And so that's the principle that will guide us.
Protest organizers say the idea of being put on trial in the mainland would silence Beijing's critics in what is now China's freest city.
There is no fair trial. There is no humane punishment guarantees on the mainland.
History points to one good reason to worry about political activists being taken to China to face the Communist Party's justice. 5 booksellers who sold work critical of Chinese leaders went missing in late 2015 from Hong Kong, later turning up in mainland China, where they confessed to illegally distributing books banned on the mainland. The confessions were widely viewed as coerced. Christy, Beijing, state media in the mainland kind of using the kind of tactics that we've seen before in terms of blaming the protests on outside forces, saying things like the United States, as we mentioned in our piece, has maybe something to do with fomenting dissent here as a way to kind of explain away what I think most people in the city would agree is a grassroots movement. I think if you said to the million or so people on the street that this was coming from the United States, I think they might be quite offended by that.
Into what makes this extradition bill so controversial. Our critics say it will leave anyone on Hong Kong soil vulnerable to being grabbed by Chinese authorities, whether for political reasons or even a business offense. But Hong Kong's government defends the bill, saying that it is designed to plug legal loopholes by allowing them to decide on a case-by-case basis whether to send suspects to places where it does not have a formal extradition agreement, like mainland China. But far beyond the shores of Hong Kong, the extradition bill is drawing criticism from the likes of the United States and Europe.
So the police are there now at the Legislative Council building today, but where were they yesterday? They made no effort to protest, to protect rather the council building when the protesters ransacked it. Have they offered any explanation for that?
Yeah, this is a controversial issue, like many people are discussing, and many are really critical about what they did last night, because at the very beginning, police have they have deployed a certain number of police inside the electrical building, but suddenly at night they retreated. So that leads to the occupation. But they are also criticized by some of the pro-democracy lawmakers that they think this is a kind of tactic to trap the protesters and let them enter the building, and so that it gives a reason for the police to use a more vigorous force, like tear gas we saw last night, to disperse the protesters. So this is a very controversial issue. She is not addressing the major concerns of the protesters. So the protesters, they are not satisfied, and this is not going to solve the problem, and this is not going to ease the tension between the protesters and the government.
We have millions of people took to the street, not getting any positive response from the government. Only after the second Great March, when we had more than 2 million people came out, the government promised to suspend the bill, but refused to withdraw the bill completely. Now, technically, they would only give us 12 working days to resume the second reading of the bill, and the bill can be passed in the legislature, because the pro-government establishment people have the majority of the vote, and the pro-democracy legislators are outnumbered by them. So at any point in time, if they do not withdraw completely, we are at risk of passing a bill that would endanger the personal liberty and other types of freedom, and even rule of law in Hong Kong. Well, the bill itself would allow the mainland government to arrest any person that they can provide evidence on a prima facie level that on the surface there is sufficient evidence that they have committed crime in the mainland. Now, we know things can be faked in mainland, and that virtually gives the power of the mainland regime to arrest or freeze any person's property at will. This is something that we don't want to see happen in Hong Kong.
Joining us now from Cambridge is the Chinese dissident and artist Ai Weiwei. Do you think that China will be rattled enough by what they've seen today to respond with force, Ai Weiwei?
Which is very possible. China has a record to use force 30 years ago to crash down the most peaceful demonstration by students. And if you see what happens in Hong Kong today, students are very rational and very, peaceful. I feel very suspicious about what's happening. I think the government is trying to find an excuse to do something. So you can see Carrie Lam immediately says she cannot have any kind of negotiation or talk with the students because of the violence. I personally, I think this is not normal. Very possible is the Hong Kong government trying to find some excuse to maintain this position, no negotiation, because very clearly this lady who, Carrie Lam is not cannot act independently. She is a representative of the central government, and the central government would never negotiate. I think they are not going to negotiate, and there will be a hard line, and they also possibly, if there's more demonstration, they possibly just use force. I think the British government, all the government of the world should understand this is not just a situation between Hong Kong and the Chinese government, or it's not conflicts just between these two systems, but rather reflects China's condition with the world.